128K for most of 364. Or 1.5 megabytes for Rupert. Apparently when he used to edit it,
he wanted it clear.
Make no mistake.
Oh, good.
I might just leave it just slightly ajar at the moment, so just in case I need to get back to it. So you've handled your cat. You're not next, though, are you?
No, he's just doing a practice. So we do have, certainly we're picking up the video here.
Okay, so we need to
put that to screen.
To put it to screen. So that's projector 1.
Okay.
And that's projector 2.
So you can have it twice if you want.
Really sweet people. Totally sweet, yeah.
Well, you can have
this is still running though, this just keeps running, nothing's changed that one, so. What basically just got a camera and we're taking a feed out of here, so.
Which camera? That one up there?
This one.
That one?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's fine.
So where is that one?
I wouldn't go to
Right, okay.
I think if it's on here.
Yeah, it's got a green light. No, it's not on there. Yeah. Okay, so.
It's the... No, we're on the wrong screen.
Yeah, that's just merely the
Yeah, can we make sure that the actual whatever's
camera.
whatever's going through the video is what we need.
Give me a look. All right, hang on. I'll try and grab that up. Okay.
And that's what I should be receiving here.
Good.
Okay.
So we're looking good there.
That's what I want.
Yeah, it's interesting that we've got we've got display on that screen. Are you getting data on yours, Al?
Hang on.
No.
See these? Okay.
Yeah, this is for preview.
Yeah, this is preview.
Preview.
Yeah, but I'm not quite sure how to get that. I'm not quite sure how to get that back on there. I would have thought that source would go to there.
I think it was it setup or was it?
I could go into setup, but I don't really want to change that. But you'll get these ones here are. See if we go to PC.
No, we've got that. You've lost me on the.
Okay.
I've got to keep that. Yeah, that all going. I'm just streaming. I'm not worrying about what's on screen.
Okay. Well, the thing is that I don't know how to get back to. That's the source.
Well, for your show, that should be.
You don't want the video up there, though, do you?
No, we don't want the video up there.
I think if you press that one.
Yeah, but if I do that, then the source changes.
Yeah, no, I've lost it. You've gone to the wrong camera.
Yeah.
Camera 1.
Well, that's camera. I'm on camera. We actually need
camera 1.
We need camera 2, actually.
All right. Oh.
Yeah, that's it.
Is that the right
That's the
one?
one you want?
Yeah, but you don't want it up in the background. You just want the computer.
No, because that's changing when we've got the source.
What do I call it? 10 or whatever.
So you've got that. That's fine. But what I don't know how to do is to change the source up to the projectors. There must be a way of actually leaving that on there. Now, if you do that, you get this up. But you're
That's what we did that.
That's
and that one.
Yeah.
And that one. And I think it leaves it. No, it doesn't. And then
that's.
The other hole.
yeah, I was just
Yeah, that's a camera.
Yeah.
That's it.
We're done.
Okay.
You got it? Perfect.
Okay. Well, we need to get rid of this.
So no one can touch it?
No. The trouble is that we're not putting up. How do we put up the laptop?
Okay, just point. Oh yeah.
It's okay because this will work for the.
You know that one.
Well, this will work. I think your source will have now changed.
No, it's still fine.
It's still fine? Yeah. Excellent. All right. So we're right? Yeah, I think we've pressed enough buttons.
As long as it's the top one, I think, or the second one. One of them. Don't do both. So.
Well, that's after lunch when they're coming.
Yeah, I'll set it up after lunch. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, no worries.
That's all right.
So
You need yours.
I gotta go back.
I'm on for 12. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm the one before lunch.
Okay.
That'll be great.
So you might need to...
I'm just getting out.
Well, I've really got to go back to it. If someone else comes in and starts mucking around with it.
That's all right. That should be ready for the presenters.
How are they going to do it though?
Well, no, because this is, as far as I know, we just need PowerPoint.
Right, and that's their PowerPoint stuff.
That's their PowerPoint, yeah.
Oh,
and
really?
mine's below that, so.
So they know you'll be touching anything other than that.
Only learning courses as well. All right.
Are you right, Brandon? Cause
Yeah, I'm coming out.
What's happened is everybody's made it so simple to set up. Once you want to try and do something a little bit strange,
That's it. Don't twirl the dials. Yeah, well, it's a temptation. Okay. Pretty good. We're just doing a bit of testing there. I'm bringing in.
Oh, okay. So they have to put this pack on.
No, that's it.
Oh, just sitting
We'll
there.
see.
There you go.
Yeah, good stuff.
I don't know who's
Hi, nice to meet you.
I've got my consultation on here.
Oh,
I
okay.
just need to plug in somewhere.
Yep.
It's not.
No.
It's not. You haven't set
No,
up
I
a
didn't
computer?
plug in.
Oh, okay.
Oh, those USB keys are great.
Yeah.
I've lost mine. That's the only problem. They're so small.
Yeah.
My partner asked me if he could borrow it the other day, and I looked everywhere and can't find it. It's gone.
I think it's how your partner borrowed it and lost it. That would be a hanging offence, wouldn't it?
Now, Bill, are you presenting on behalf of everyone, or are they all?
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
okay. Okay.
Susan's in Sydney.
Okay. I've got to whip out because we've got this little marker so we can hold up, so we don't have to interrupt you. Just like 5 minutes.
sorry, so we've got 20 minutes, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I'll just go and grab those.
I'm on Mark. I'm less than 20 minutes. I'm Darren.
Cool. There you go. So where's you from?
Information system.
I didn't recognise you. Sorry, I'm in the day. Pretty good. Yeah.
Where's you from?
And then getting back to
There's still quite a lot to get through.
Actually, no. Make the network. Well, I'll see you later. Yeah. Is that all right? I don't have
Well, what if the subject of this paper came
Next one.
Well,
Now, only when it's working.
only just.
Up and out. Good morning to you all. My name is Barraket. I'm one of the members of the organising committee for the conference, and I'm chairing this session. The way we're going to run it, if it's okay with people, is the session arranged there for up to 20 minutes. Speaker, and then if we've got time at the end, we'll then open the floor for further questions to all of the speakers. Is that a reasonable kind of format for people?
Yeah.
Right. In the spirit of good conscious organisation, because I'm on the organising committee, I had absolutely no time to avail myself of that actual to give you a couple of words about themselves. I'll just hand over to Bill Harley, who's going to speak to the first paper, which is Online Consultation, E-Democracy and E-Resistance in the Case of the Development Gateway.
Thanks, Jo. Yeah, my name's Bill Harley. I'm in the management department here at the University of Melbourne. I have a guilty secret, which is that I used to be a political scientist once upon a time, but, well, you have to work. This paper comes out of a subject which Cynthia and I teach in the management department here, called Managing in Information Societies. Another guilty secret. It's essentially a sociology subject, but I shouldn't be telling the whole side people that, which deals with social, political, and business-related implications of the internet. One of the case studies that we use in this subject is the World Bank's Global Development Gateway project, and in looking at the development of the gateway, Cynthia and I got interested in the political struggles involving the World Bank, NGOs and other actors in the development field to define and construct the gateway. And in looking at this, we got interested in I suppose, the extent to which the processes through which the Gatekeepers were developed were in any meaningful sense democratic. We collected data from 2 online discussion forums, one run by the World Bank and one run by a non-government organisation, and then worked with Susan Ainsworth, who's a former PhD student of ours now at the University of Sydney, to develop this paper. Susan and Cynthia can't be here today, so it falls to me to present. This is the first time the paper's been aired publicly, so be gentle, and I'll look forward to some input and questions. Our starting point for the paper is the big question: what are the implications of the internet for democracy? And in the course of the paper, we really look at 3 sub-questions of that. The first one is, what are the claims made about e-democracy in the literature, and what are the likely limitations of internet-based forms of participatory democracy? We look at the first 2 questions very briefly in the paper, and I'm going to try fairly hard not to spend too much time on them this morning. We look at them really by reviewing the literature, and the last question is the one that we try and look at in a bit more detail using the data from the online discussion forums. And we're not trying to come up with any sort of definitive answer to the big question: what are the implications of the internet for democracy? We're trying to make a fairly modest theoretical and empirical contribution by looking at the last question. And what we're trying to do is challenge the conventional wisdom which says the more participation, the more democratic are the outcomes, if you like. So we want to dispute the claim made in the democracy literature that as long as people are participating, then the outcomes to that extent will be democratic. We argue that in some contexts, including one of the 2 forums we look at, in fact, participation is likely to lead to a subversion of the democratic process. Can we start very briefly with the key views of e-democracy in the literature? I don't want to labour the first 2. I'm assuming that everybody's pretty familiar with the utopian and dystopian views. Stephen Coleman, I think, did a fairly good job of challenging the utopian view this morning, the idea that everything's going to change for the better, it's all going to be wonderful. The dystopian view being the diametrically opposed view. I don't think either of these views is particularly plausible. Both of them are technologically determinist, and at least the utopian view depends on the flawed assumption that everybody has access to the technology and the skills to use it. So what we focus on is what I'd see as a middle view, if you like, between these 2. And I think it's the dominant view in the literature on e-democracy, and this is what Paul characterises as the utilitarian view of e-democracy. Utilitarian in the sense that we judge the virtue of something by its usefulness. In this case, we judge the internet on the basis of usefulness in facilitating some kind of participation, some kind of participatory democracy. The utilitarian view has three main characteristics which are important for our paper. The first one is that it advocates participatory democracy. The utilitarian view says what the internet does is provides the potential for participation because it opens up the potential for interaction. So the argument here is the internet opens up new ways in which citizens and their representatives can interact directly. That is, it emphasises participation more than representation. Secondly, this view makes the assumption that participation is a good thing. Okay? The more participation, the better. If people can participate in decision-making forums, says this view, they'll be able to influence outcomes. Or to put it another way, the more that people participate, the more democratic will be the outcomes. The third point is that within this general view, there are 2 variants of participatory e-democracy. The first, which we can characterise as consultative democracy, was again covered, I think, fairly extensively by Stephen Coleman this morning. And this is essentially a model which emphasises vertical communication, and in particular, state agencies, politicians, bureaucrats, international organisations, using the internet to communicate downwards to stakeholders, if you like, and get information back. The second model, deliberative democracy, emphasises active decision making. It emphasises state agencies, politicians, bureaucrats and so on as simply one of a number of actors in a process of discussion, deliberation and decision making. Whereas in the consultative model or variant, things are really being run by state agencies. So I'll come back to these two variants in due course when I talk about our data. Okay, the context of our two cases of online forums is the field of international development, and the dominant actor in this field, or at least the bit of it we're looking at, is the World Bank. I assume everybody's familiar with the World Bank and what it does. That it's a key actor in the sense that controls the purse strings to a large extent. The specific event that we focus on in the paper is the development by the World Bank of the Global Development Gateway. Is anybody familiar with the Gateway? Has anybody heard of the Gateway? Okay, a couple of people. It's essentially I suppose you could characterise it as a supranational virtual organisation. The Gateway is a project set up by the World Bank to establish a series of country-specific internet portals run by the World Bank and a variety of non-government organisations. And the idea of the project and the portals is that the portals exist to encourage the development and sharing of information about development and poverty reduction. As you might expect, with the World Bank and NGOs being involved in this, it was fairly contentious. A lot of the NGOs were suspicious of the World Bank's motives in setting up the Gateway. There was a lot of debate and disagreement about the virtues of the Gateway. In the process of setting up the Gateway, the World Bank established an online discussion forum, which was there for the bank, for NGOs and other interested parties to participate in, ostensibly to have some sort of influence over the course of the development of the Gateway. At the same time, or actually slightly before the World Bank Forum was set up, Barraket, which is a Canadian-based NGO, set up an alternative discussion forum. The idea being that it would provide an alternative avenue for discussion. Both of the forums operated during 2000 and 2001. There was overlap in their timing. There was overlap in who participated in the forums. And our data source for this paper consists of all of the postings to both the forums during the course of their lives, basically. So hundreds of pages of transcripts of messages which people posted to the two forums, and also we rely to a lesser extent on reports from the forum websites. As a point of clarification, I guess a lot of the e-democracy literature deals with the internet as facilitating participatory democracy involving citizens and state agencies. In our case, the context's rather different in the sense that we're not talking about citizens and state agencies. We're talking about an international organisation, in the case of the World Bank. We're talking about NGOs, and we're talking about other interested parties. So it's not democracy in the sense of democracy within state institutions. It's much more about democratic participation in decision making within, I suppose, the establishment of this supranational organisation. Okay, what do we do with the data? I should be very clear here that we're at an early stage. Our analysis is very much exploratory and tentative. One of my co-authors refers to it euphemistically as a shallow first cut of the data, which is code for we've just had a bit of a play around with it. We haven't fully coded it or finished with it yet, but I think we've got enough here to give you an idea of what's happening in the two forums. Our general approach could be characterised as discourse analysis. Our data are texts. Our data are the exchanges on the online forums. And what we're interested in is the way that texts create meanings. What we've done in our preliminary analysis is looked at the postings to each forum and tried to map the patterns and interactions between them. There's not an easy way of presenting the data or explaining in simple terms what I mean. But what we've tried to do is look at the web of interactions that's emerged between postings. So if somebody makes a post to one forum, who responds to that? What's the tone of their response? Who responds to those responses, and so on. So we're using this to try and map out the processes of discussion in the two forums. There's more detail of the theoretical underpinnings of this approach in the written paper, which I'm happy to give to people. I can email you copies if you're interested. And so I won't say any more about the method here. It's important to understand that some postings in each forum refer to the other forum. So we're not just looking at within forum interactions, we're also looking at across forum interactions. So what do we find in the short time I have left? We found that the forums looked very different in terms of what was going on within them. The World Bank Forum, compared to Barraket, wasn't very busy, so there were fewer posts. It tended to be a narrow range of views. There was a lack of exchanges and dialogue. Okay, it involved much more the World Bank simply providing information, and I'll come back to this in a moment. The World Bank very infrequently responded to posts. Okay, if somebody made a post challenging the World Bank, they simply ignored those posts on the whole. The Barraket forum was quite different, more heated and lively. There was a lot more interaction, a lot more exchange, a lot more meaningful dialogue, if you like. Much longer posts that included contextual information about previous activities of the World Bank. There were requests for more information from the World Bank. That is, people used the forum to, if you like, hassle the World Bank to provide more information. There was pressure for the World Bank to post results from ongoing face-to-face consultations about the gateway. And here, this is particularly important, there was a lot of discussion about whether NGOs should participate in the World Bank Forum at all, and whether they should be involved in the gateway. That is, it was explicitly argued, and I'll come back to this later, by a lot of NGOs and other actors that they simply shouldn't participate in the World Bank Forum, because by participating they were legitimising the World Bank's activities, and they were better off just not bothering. So they were actually shooting themselves in the feet, in the foot, whatever. Okay, so two very different sorts of forums. Oh, the other thing was that the Barraket e-forum was used to actively mobilise and lobby and to successfully stop some or convince some NGOs not to be involved in the gateway. Okay. What can we see here about forms of democracy? Both forums, I think, are good examples of participatory democracy, but each of them represents one of the two variants that I mapped out before. The World Bank Forum was much more consultative. It was much more about vertical information sharing. The Barraket Forum was much more deliberative. It was much more about discussion and decision making in a, I suppose, a more collaborative and shared way. And this has important implications for the way in which participation can be understood as part of democratic decision making in internet-based forums. And here we come to the point that looking at these two forums highlights the fact that sometimes participation doesn't lead to democratic outcomes. And to try and explain this, and I'm conscious of time marching on, I just want to say a little bit about control and resistance. Here we're drawing on insights from labour process theory, which is a little bit outside the literature that is mostly used to talk about e-democracy. But essentially, we're talking about the forums as being political processes in which powerful players attempt to control the outcomes and the less powerful attempt to resist those control strategies. The utilitarian model assumes that the way that you resist is by participating. If you get in there, you can influence decisions, and that's how you stop the powerful from having it all their way. And we suggest that this is problematic. It doesn't acknowledge the risk of incorporation. That is, by participating, people simply legitimise the activities of the powerful actors without having much influence. It doesn't acknowledge the fact that there may be other viable forms of resistance. So in the Barraket Forum, the conventional wisdom held up because it was deliberative democracy. Participation was a reasonably viable way of influencing outcomes. In the case of the World Bank Forum, which was an example of consultative democracy, it wasn't easy for the NGOs to influence outcomes, and thus participation was not an effective resistance strategy. Thus, non-participation became a more viable method of resisting. And this is a simple diagram representing what we think was happening in the World Bank Forum. Okay, the World Bank started by trying to elicit participation, trying to get the NGOs on board, basically, by getting them to participate in the forum. Some NGOs, so going from box 1 to box 2, some NGOs participated and tried to steer the agenda or influence the outcomes in that way. So this is the conventional view of resistance. Some NGOs argued that actually this was an ineffective strategy and simply refused to participate. Okay, so this is a second form of resistance. Then the World Bank was able to exert more control by also not participating. That is, by not responding to posts, not providing information, and so on. So what, in the last 20 seconds? Our analysis of the two forums highlights the fact that the dynamics of control and resistance are mutually constituted in a local context. That is, the way in which the powerful try to shape outcomes and the less powerful resist that is very context-specific. And in the specific case of the online forums, the forms of control and resistance focused around the interactive capacity of online forums, but was shaped by the two variants of e-democracy that were characterised by each of the forums. So what we argue is the two forums, or our analysis of the two forums, shows that there's the potential for control and resistance, not just in the conventional ways that we find in the democracy literature, but also by non-participation. That is, by subverting the interactive capacity of the internet. And we suggest that we need to go beyond the fairly simple view in the democracy literature that participation equals democracy, and acknowledge the fact that in some contexts that's not the case.
Sorry, I missed about the management of the list. Right, it is mismanaged?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, the World Bank Forum was moderated, the Bellarnet Forum wasn't, but the World Bank Forum was only moderated because of agitation on the Bellarnet Forum to have an independent moderator, so that there'd be less chance of it simply being run by the World Bank.
And what form of analysis of the data
Not so far. I mean, so far all we've done is use paper copies. So you start with a particular posting and then look at responses or non-responses to that, and so that kind of simple coding. What we'll do down the track, I'm not sure how we'll go about coding it, whether we'll use software to analyse it or not.
I seem to remember that there was a precursor pair of World Bank forums. The first one resulted in a very active forum with participation of many of the NGOs saying that there should be a gateway. The second one was restricted to parliamentarians across the world, which had a lot of invited participation. If I remember correctly, this process followed that. So I'm just wondering whether some of the resistance came from people who felt there hadn't been parties to the process, although they were in discussion.
The answer is I don't know. That's entirely possible. Without equivalent data from the precursor forums, I don't think I can answer that. But yes, it's certainly possible.
Okay, I'm conscious that time's marching on, so I'll take questions about the one out here and then you'll hold rest of the again.
And would anyone be most successful change to the content of your online report in terms of what was most successful in challenging the World Bank, and if you are, what came out of that?
What was that? Is your question, are we looking at attempts on the World Bank Forum? Okay. I wouldn't say that at this point we're looking at the most successful attempts. We're simply looking at attempts, I guess, and the way and the form of the attempts. One example that I used before was the fact that the Bellarnet Forum led to an independent moderator being put on the World Bank Forum. A second one was that through the Bellarnet Forum, it appears on the basis of the data that NGOs were discouraged from participating in the gateway and the forum. So if that's a successful form of resistance, then I guess we're looking at that.
Bill, in your analysis, did you come across any examples
No.
just ask if Bill came across any examples where decisions of the World Bank were in fact affected by what went on in the two forums.
No, not at this point. No, not any.
Just information.
Not any major decisions. Yeah, not any major decisions. And I mean, this is why the NGOs argue that perhaps it was a good idea not to be involved with the World Bank Forum at all, to go by rules. This whole idea of.
Did you say it was problematic then?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure I'd go that far, but it seems to me that it's very much like. Well, the criticisms being made by the NGOs are very much like criticisms that have been made of other sorts of participatory democracy, whether we're talking about, say, corporatist policy making or industrial democracy. That it's very hard to find any evidence of really important issues being influenced. But by virtue of people being involved in the process, there's some legitimacy according to the process.
All monitors will move on. 30 second switch of technology, so have a stretch if you want to, and then I'll introduce our next speaker. Clearly the space is not well set up for collegial discussion, although very well set up for lectures.
Yeah, I guess. It's like you're FTA with that. Oh, no, conclusion. I would need to put it on the public record.
Oh, I'm sure it's
going to off all the part because it's screwed up. That's my son.
I think it's a very, and some people would argue like, yeah, the NGOs
Great.
well done,
Yeah.
but
Oh, it's like a well-oiled machine. Fabulous. We thank Peter Chen for that. We do.
yeah, because it's take it or leave it.
Okay.
So what's the point? Well, we have a government that take it.
Okay, I'd like to hand over to Liz and Arnold, who are both presenting on redefining citizenry, internet governance, national citizenry, expectations.
Thank you very much, Joe. Good morning, everyone. It's really lovely to be here. It must be the week of conferences. I spent all day yesterday at ANU talking about dispute resolution and cross-border transactions, and my brain is going a bit crazy. I was really pleased to listen to Stephen Coleman's presentation this morning, because part of what Bruce and I have been doing is to determine the questions we want to ask. And hearing the presentation that was previous to ours, there's quite a few parallels in terms of what we're trying to look at and how we're trying to frame our research. Just a little bit of background. I've just finished a PhD at QUT in the Information Technology faculty that looked at the globalisation of regulation and its impact on the domain name system. And the reason why that's important for this is that, for example, in institutions like ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, and the .au Domain Administration, which is just down the road in Carlton, focuses on making decisions and making policy and implementing those policy decisions by consensus and by bottom-up policy development processes. And part of that system revolves around the use of email and the use of forums. Bruce has been very involved in a number of things in Australia with respect to the .au domain administration, and I've focused a lot of my work on ICANN and on policy development processes, and of course that was the focus of my research. Just to preface some of the remarks that we're going to make today, we have to, the start point of some of this analysis assumes that we operate from an environment of industry self-regulation and that governments have ceded to organisations and to groups of people some responsibility for making decisions about policy. And I was delighted to see Ian Johnston up the back of the room today. Ian and I did some work for establishing a code of practice for registrars in Australia. And it was one of the most difficult things to do online in a forum that everybody communicated by email and on very, very long and tedious conference calls. They're very active but select communities of people. And 90% of the work is done by about 2.5% of the people. I was really struck by Stephen Coleman's thoughts today on participation and efficacy. And one of the things that I think will be an ongoing theme for me is it efficient to do things this way? Turning now quickly to what we've looked at. Internet governance is one of those terms like e-democracy that's bandied around with gay abandon by many people. And we don't actually understand what we're talking about. We actually have to come back to some first principles that say, well, what is the internet and what is the governance of the internet? And in the context of this kind of work, I really have focused on it from an architectural point of view, from a Lawrence Lessig code point of view where the technology is important, but there's also many more dimensions to it than that. And what is governance? Is that different from what governments do? And is it some kind of new concept that we want to have some more thought about in terms of what makes up the two words together? What is the internet? And I think this morning really focused on, we're not quite sure exactly what we're talking about, and that happened yesterday too in the context of discussing electronic commerce, and also with respect to what governance is. The other important issue is who's involved. And I was really interested to listen to Bill's presentation about who is actually involved, who are the actors, who are the people. And one of the significant next pieces of work that I'd like to do is a demographic of influence, of who the key actors are, what kind of authority do they act on, how do they speak, who do they speak for, and are they effective in representing that position. Citizenship, to me, is quite a very complex concept. Where do we sit? Where do we belong? Are we a citizen of a country? Are we a citizen of a group of people? Are we a citizen of a kind of community? A citizen of what and where by whom? And I think that in some of the data which Bruce will talk about later on, it's actually quite obvious that it's quite possible to participate in things that relate to Australia, even though you're not here. Finally, representation. And I was delighted to hear Stephen Common's cynical and factual and precise commentary about politicians. Having worked in Parliament House for a very long period of time, it resonated with me. What kind of decisions are we asking people to make in online forums? What is people's ability to participate? Does it rely on, for example, having sight, having a keyboard, having access to ADSL, being able to afford a computer? Is that an exclusive technology in itself? And listening to the first speaker this morning, I wondered whether that was still the case in terms of access to the internet. And what kind of mechanisms are there for participation? So there's some significant work, and I won't go through this because it's in the paper. We've looked at governance, citizenship and representation, and I think some more work needs to be done on refining exactly what we're talking about, to ask the right questions. Again, I return to that, ask the right questions, get the right perspective, head off on a reasonable course. Some of the things that we looked at, the thing that we looked at was something called the DNS list, which is the domain name system list in Australia. And the DNS list has been going for quite a long time. Its purpose was to its purpose is, and it's still a very active forum, to act as an online forum for people to ask and post and answer all kinds of questions. It's also a forum for extremely vexatious flaming and personal vitriol, and the numbers of people who hit the unsubscribe button, I think, and Bruce will talk about this in the statistics, are great, because it's quite difficult. It's quite difficult. Etiquette doesn't seem to have leached its way into the DNS. And if any of you are posters or lurkers or participants, you will know what I mean. It's been around for quite a long time, and Bruce has got very detailed participation rates, and we're very fortunate to have the assistance of Robert Ells, the elusive and faraway Robert Ells person, extremely helpful for us. Another fellow called Kim Davies, who's been running the list for quite a long time. And it's an unmoderated list, although I think Kim gets frustrated and says, right, that's enough, we're moving the whole bloody thing, when it gets out of hand. The interesting difference between this and what Bill was talking about in terms of the World Bank is that OUDA, which is where the focus of the discussion is headed, does participate, but it's not hosted by them. They don't have any reason to take any notice. Quite often in board discussions is, oh, bloody hell, the damn DNS list, God, let's ignore it. And I was on the board for 2 years, so I know what happened. But having said that, there's quite a lot of participation and activity, but questionable amounts of influence. And I think that we have to be able to measure and mark and capture more information about the level of influence, and I'm not exactly sure how you measure that. The difference between the DNS list and things that happen within ICANN, for example, there's some similarities, is that ICANN actually does respond, it does post responses, and it's quite sensitive to, for example, ICANN Watch and other ICANN critical sites that watch very closely what goes on in the organisation at an international level. The data is a tricky one, and I'm going to ask Bruce if he can go through all of this, because he's constructed all of the graphs and put together all of the material, because I'm the world's worst Excel spreadsheet person. And he's done an enormous amount of work sorting things out, determining, framing, working out, deriving the statistics. And I'll turn quickly to him, and then I'll come back at the end to finish off with the questions that we think need to be answered as we're going forward, and the other research the context in which other research exists for this.
Okay, so this DNS list, it's managed by a volunteer. It's extremely lightly managed. For practical purposes, there's no moderation. Anyone can subscribe. You don't need to be a resident of Australia. You don't need to have a website. It's been running since 1996. during that time, during the period that we've examined it, which runs up from start date to early 2004, there have been something like 10,553 messages, and I've had the joyous task of reading all of them. So we've, I sympathise with anyone who's been sort of looking at the development gateway and any of these lists. It's one of the real challenges with this sort of analysis is someone actually has to get down there and actually crunch through the information and ideally go beyond sort of basic sort of statistical counts and start looking at sort of some sort of analysis of the information. So what we've done is we've gone through, we've tried to sort of do some demographic analysis of postings, and we've tried to sort of map patterns in the activity on the list. You run out of time, so in the full paper you get sort of the rundown about why any of this matters. So just to start off with, perhaps that everyone's familiar with, basically the internet has taken off globally. Within Australia, you've had the same sort of phenomenon. It's now in over 50% of households, at least sometime during the month, and Australians, businesses, other organisations have been quite vigorous in taking up domain names. Domain names are basically administration of domain names, administration of the architecture is ours responsibility, and so it's the centre of the DNS list. So it's just a very basic graph of patterns in DNS traffic over that period. As you can see, there are a number of quite clear spikes. Some of those spikes map to particular events. One of those events is the establishment of OUDA. One of the events is what we call the repatriation of .au, the arrangements when responsibility for .au passed from Robert Ellis, basically a self-selected administrator, to an organisation called OUDA, .au administration, which is backed up by federal legislation, has a board, has a proper legal existence, publishes minutes, holds meetings, consults with the community, and so on. Some of those spikes are basically attacks with flaming. They have no relationship whatsoever that we can see to any matter of substance. And you can get some sense of the relationships when you start to map. Bottom line gives you if you like, sort of trigger messages. Top line gives you the responses. You can see that sort of people sort of basically go apeshit over, for want of a better word, over particular messages. Okay. Now, DNS list, as far as we know, involves several hundred people. There are some real uncertainties about the list because it's clear from personal contact, it's clear from indications within individual messages that many people have subscribed but don't actually read the messages. And so this is one of the questions I had when talking about the World Bank development gateway. Can we be sure that say you can post till sort of your eyeballs are dropping off, till your fingers are dropping off, but is there anyone at the other end reading? And it's quite clear that with some of these messages, people have basically just said enough. I will put a filter on my email box so that any messages from a particular person, they just don't, as far as I'm concerned, they don't appear. I'll read, say, a message that comes in from Liz, but a message that comes from Mr. X over here. I know he's a flamer, I know he's a crazy, I don't want to hear about his sort of paranoid fantasies, but ICANN has black helicopters just around the corner. So I'm just got, and it's literally that, or that ICANN is sort of involved with Satan. Literally, people will just filter out. As far as the official statistics go, we still have several hundred people subscribing, but the actual readership of messages may be significantly lower. In terms of posts by participant, you can actually map this, and for a number of reasons we've suppressed the names. But you can see that there are some distinct peaks those peaks basically relate to people who have a particular, if you like, a particular personal agenda. In some cases, it's a commercial agenda. There are indications that say they are unhappy with the regime, and that they want no regulation because regulation is bad for their business. If you want to scam, you don't want people to regulate. There are also people who have sort of, if you like, particular concerns about sort of global governance, about the internet, black helicopters, whatever, and this data maps quite nicely. Okay, so there's another representation of alphabetical going along the range from sort of A for Arnold to, I don't know, X for Xerox or whatever. You can see that particular posters are quite prolific. Others post very little. These, I stress, are people who've actually posted. There are many people on the list who have not posted. People like me, they just sit there, they read, delete, whatever. So this is a map of DNS list subscription. The gap you see there reflects the fact that data just isn't available. Again, this is a problem with lists that are administered by volunteers. Much of the rhetoric about the internet has been volunteerism is inherently good. One of the downsides is that volunteers necessarily, in a lot of cases, just don't have time to keep statistics about this sort of thing. Don't keep records. This is not a forum that's run by the World Bank. It doesn't have a lot of resources behind it. Information is not available. So we're being reasonably cautious in the paper about some of the conclusions that we're drawing. Okay. As Liz said before, there are a number of subscribers. You don't have to be an Australian to be a subscriber. What we've done here is basically go through all the postings, go through all the email addresses that we can find, and dissect them on the basis of whether they're a .au within the Australian space or elsewhere. And when you break that down, most of the people are within .au. Most of the posters to that list are within, perhaps unsurprisingly, are within the .com.au part, the com2ld within that group. There's a substantial government component, education component, quite small. CSIRO 1%, a few organisations, a few individuals who use the id2ld, a couple of nets, and then there are a number of subscribers who come from outside the Australian space. Now these are people who could well be physically located in Australia. They could indeed be sitting at a terminal upstairs, but they've chosen, for whatever reason, to use a non-AU address in their email. Most of them are GTLDs, com, org, net, and so on. But there are a number of people who've used. There are a number of subscribers that we believe are coming from Singapore. We know from personal contact there are a number of people who are on the list, who contribute to the list, who read the list, who are physically located in Brussels, physically located in Vienna. So it's, to some extent, it's a global list. If you break up contributions within the top 10 cohorts, though, people in the top 10 range of posts, most of them do not come from if you like, do not have a close affiliation with OUTA. Most are coming from outside OUTA. And just breaking that figure up a bit further, you can see the number of people are unidentified, number of government, a large legal contingent. The legal contingent, in fact, appears to be growing as we're seeing the standard sort of progression from engineers running the net to lawyers running the net. That's what you'd expect. It's probably a good thing. I'm a consultant. I work in a research company. I'm noted for my robust scepticism about this sort of thing. So I think lawyers are good. You can see that there are a number of consultants, and you can see a large registrar and reseller component. These are basically the people who will flog you a .au domain name. And we were interested in doing some sort of comparative analysis. We didn't have the resources to do a sort of an in-depth comparison between the DNS list and, say, the link list, which on an impressionistic basis has very similar characteristics to DNS list. But we thought one manageable data set was to compare participation, the demographics of participation on the DNS, the top DNS list, and participation in the various outer panels. Outer has a number of advisory panels. Those panels are formed by volunteers. There's no remuneration. There's no real selection process. Basically, you do what I did a number of years ago. Is you put up your hand. You say, I'm interested in domain name policy in Australia. I have some interest or even some expertise, and if you're lucky, you get on the panel. These panels, and Ian's been on a panel. These panels can be fairly large. Debate can be fairly bracing, I think would be the word. So we've tried to do some sort of comparison between membership demographics of the panels and demographics of, if you like, the top cohort, the people who've done the most posts, the DNS list. What you find is that they're broadly similar. There's a major spike on the DNS list, the purple list, and that's basically because we think we're picking up participation from industry, people who've got a commercial stake in rule setting. A lot of cases, these are people that, as far as we can tell, have never been to an outer meeting, definitely have not made a public submission to outer, haven't engaged with the organisation in that way. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a nice example of sort of clickocracy. It's very easy to sit at home, or sit in your office, and send a long message about Satan, or a long a diatribe about the iniquities of the regulator's chief executive. It's not easy to sit down and actually properly engage with the organisation, properly engage with governance, and supply the organisation with a real submission, one that will be published by that organisation, one that will be examined by your peers, one that can be examined on its merits. It's much easier to sit home. Okay. And just to wrap up, this is a final graph. It comes from Liz's dissertation. Just gives you a bit of comparison of the participation in ICANN, the ICANN boards and ICANN public meetings. We've done a similar analysis, basically going through the demographics of the people who've gone to ICANN public meetings, large meetings held 3 times a year, usually involve a couple of hundred people, and you're seeing roughly the same sorts of demographics there.
I'll just quickly wrap up. It's early research, and it's posed far more questions than it's answered. We really need to come back to the big questions which we talked about at the beginning, which were internet governance. What is it? What issues are being addressed? What happens when governments cede responsibility? Who is involved? Where is their authority? What kind of mandate do they have, and how do they act? The data needs further refinement, and there is no doubt about that. We would love a bigger survey sample. We would love more robust data. We would love better ways of collecting it. We need to do more comparisons with overseas data, and I think that data does exist, but there's masses of it. For example, I think that an experiment with the at-large experiment that ICANN ran about global participation and the way in which the at-large forum is now constructed would be very helpful. And there was a comment today in Stephen Coleman's presentation about modelling, and I think that we really need to settle down and establish some modelling for how we count people, for how we discount some kinds of postings, for how we discount. Do we allow the counting of personal diatribe? Do we allow the counting? Do we look at things that are off topic? Do we analyse things that are really not at all related to what, in this case, this list is set up for? and a better integration with the theoretical literature around the globalisation of regulation, around issues of citizenship, and around issues of nationality and representation. And I'd like to just end there so that we can take questions if we have time. Thanks, Joe.
Very happy with how well we're doing this time. It's only got slightly over. So we've got some questions. Over here again,
Yeah. The guy who raised the whole issue of
Yeah.
how do you research such this? Would you look at similar sorts of risks that operate in the UK or the States? But then you're dealing with national styles and national types, and you're raising
Absolutely.
point those whole issues
Sure.
of identity. And New Zealand has been Lincoln Dahlberg, I don't know his name, that he's done some theoretical work using cover market framework up to his dialogue and so on. You may want to look at stuff. Right?
I think comparing like for like is actually quite difficult, and I think that there is a chance. For example, the .ca regime is modelled very similarly to the .au regime. However, the difference is that there are 30 million people in Canada, and there are 20 million in Australia, so there's significant statistical differences between the two, but similarities in language, in legal tradition, in the way in which the board of the organisation is constructed, in their commitment to consensus policy development. And I think you can really get a stack of identifiable characteristics that allow you to collect data from similar sources and then make some comparison. But it's quite difficult.
Now, you didn't tell us much at the beginning, and this is not an area that I know really well, about what does it mean to have industry regulation. There's quite a bit of work going on in that kind of area, that looking at how it's not just about saying, well, like, we don't need to regulate tax paying anymore, everyone will just do it and self-regulate, I mean...
Yeah, I wouldn't pay.
I mean, you raised the question yourself at the end, like what's the mandate, what's the authority? Can you just tell us a little bit about the context?
Sure. I'm sorry I raised that quickly. Yeah, in the paper there's some background about how, and it came out of a paper that was published from Murdoch University about the history of internet governance in Australia as it related to the establishment of .au and what actually happened. And that paper came out in June of last year. And it focused around, and when I talk about industry self-regulation, in a very cynical sense, which is we don't want to do this anymore because we don't have the bureaucracy to sustain it, and we don't have the money to do it. And, well, industry, it's your responsibility, you ought to go and do it, and the regulatory entry point for that is it costs you X to be accredited as a registrar, it costs you Y to tender for a registry service, it costs you Q to be a member of AUDA, but that's not just relevant, I don't think, to this industry. And the telecoms industry is very similar, the utilities industry is similar again. And there's a fair amount of discussion around, particularly with respect to the ACCC and codes of practice and codes of conduct and how you establish those. And I think it's a definite policy position within, and has been for quite a long time within Australia, the Australian political environment, that we would enable industries to be responsible for themselves. And I think we also see that across different kinds of areas like privacy protection, that industry will have a trust mark that says we comply with this, we comply with this, we comply with this. But there is a balance to that.
You're talking about questions for legitimacy. I think e-governance, the experience without it is really interesting, because I think one could make a very good case that the outer DNS list, in terms of, for practical purposes, is completely irrelevant. It's not necessarily read by the World Bank's development gate, may be different, but it's not necessarily read by, assimilated by outer. Certainly not assimilated by parts of government, and government, I think, outer, and certainly much of industry are quite happy with non-electronic consultation. Outer's legitimacy derives from the way it operates.
and its constitution and its
It goes to great lengths to consult offline, and basically this is one of the problems with light moderation of lists. They're wonderful things, but if they're taken out, basically they're driven by crazies. We were talking before about sort of powerful actors and small actors. What we see with the DNS list, I think, is that there are some very noisy actors, and they drive people off the list to the extent that the list loses all legitimacy and can be quite legitimately ignored in favour of other mechanisms for consultation, for distribution of information, by outer, by government, by industry, by non-government organisations.
I think the other side to that, and it's me being cynical, is that, oh, well, it's been discussed on the DNS list, therefore we've done our public consultation. It's all okay, folks. We've consulted the issues out there. We know what people think. It's not framed. It doesn't have terms of reference. It doesn't have timeframes. It doesn't have a reporting structure. And I think that's where you end up, and Bruce is right, in terms of the legitimacy of the discussion. It's not framed in a formalised way.
I'm conscious that investors can speak and we need to move on, but there's also speaking on questions, so it's like a collective commitment to having a student to the end.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. So our next speaker is Darren Skidmore, who's going to be talking about gatekeepers on the internet. We'll just do a technology change. You happy there? Bottle of water?
Thank you. Okay. I'm Darren Skidmore. There'll be a bit of a change of pace. This will be a more technical view, and it's probably going to actually turn into more of a sort of lecture tutorial. It was written mainly because I come from the Department of Information Systems. We're much more interested in technology, well, not so much technology, which is and the basis. So it's not going to be anywhere near as analytical as it was last year. And I do apologise for that. As I was going through and writing this, it was difficult for me to know where to pitch it and at what level of knowledge. Yeah. Oh. If you didn't understand what DNS was, I'll actually go over it and talk about that. So I'm going to talk about gatekeepers, really in terms of stopping information or those things that allow information to flow. I've separated them into technical, social and legal, but don't take too much from those titles. They're really there just to give me a little bit of structure. Okay. I was wondering if more people were going to put the host count up. That's the minimum number of hosts. The 233 million is the minimum number of hosts on the internet. It's not the number of people, it's not the number of computers connected to the internet, it's the number of hosts. They're generally network servers giving out information. And that was at 2004. Again, there's been a massive rise in the amount of hosts. And those hosts can be serving web pages, they can be email servers, they can be FTP servers. This is something quite that I've come across. And I'm not quite sure how they derive the languages. The languages don't add up to 100% because in their home, and they're certainly not geographically based. Certainly on the site there's information about in the US how there's many languages spoken, and not all of them are English. Leaving aside whether or not American is English or not. The Asian languages are up there as well. There's very few languages that I can find that are not European or Asian. So that's one of the things. Interestingly enough, I just managed this morning to find another statistic, which I think 68% of the websites are in English in the world, but I haven't had a chance to follow that up. So I think there's about 729 million people connected to the internet, and that is just a guess. How they actually came to that conclusion, I don't know. Okay. For me, talking about the internet, and I'll talk about this, it's very much like the postal mail service. I don't really subscribe to the superhighway theory, although it is a very good analogy. All the information sent around the internet is basically based on a hope method. They hope it will get through. Generally, it's a pretty good hope. Like the people that designed it and built it did a very, very good job. But things do go missing. Sometimes packages are lost. When you're sending out something onto the internet, it actually doesn't know how to get there. It will go and find it. Although, you know, sometimes they do break the packages into smaller bits, which may or may not. And they look like a postcard. If I can get this going. Okay. I sent an email. This is something I did quite a few years ago. This bit here is what the internet, the middle bit there, between the 0 and the A, is what is actually transmitted over the internet. That hex, because it's in hex, because it goes to me. And I sent some emails, and that's what it means. You'll see that. That goes over the internet. It doesn't matter if it's email, ICQ message, or anything like that. So I captured that doing a packet capture coming from my computer. So I haven't broken any ethics rules. But that's basically what's transmitted over the internet. Oops. Okay. Now, another thing that I get reasonably upset about is, and just to make sure, the internet is not the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web is just a visible part of the internet. Email, file transfer, the instant messages, ICQ, MSN, all of those, web services, video tasks, all travel across the internet. They all have different protocols, different ways of doing it. So just because one of them gets through is not the same thing. You mentioned Leslie. Leslie, in his book, the Commons book, talks about the internet as being an edge-to-edge network. In networking terms, that actually means that nothing really cares about what's inside of the network. It's the devices at the edge of the network that have the intelligence. They're the ones that set it up, and they just give a destination and put the packages into those numbers and send it through. So, the internet inside of it, there's devices inside of the internet, but they just take and pass on the information. They're the ones that start to route. So, the upshot of this, and this is part of the problem which may occur in the future, is that currently the internet is built so that it doesn't care what travels over it or through it. Whether or not it doesn't care, it doesn't even, unless it's getting smart and doing some other things, it doesn't know whether or not you're sending a web page or an email or a video transfer. It just looks at the destination and sends it through, just sends the data. It relies on a thing called TCP/IP, which is the Transmission Control Protocol, and that's what it just is. Now, I'll get into the DNS in a minute. The internet actually works on, and I do apologise if you know all about this, on IP numbers, or Internet Protocol numbers. It relies on what's called the dotted quad. University of Melbourne is actually 128.250.6.182. If you type that into your web browser, you will get the University of Melbourne homepage. And there's 4 billion addresses, depending on how you write a billion. Every device connected to the internet requires a unique number. This is a critical part of the internet. There is only space on the internet for that many devices. There are ways around it, but that's the maximum number of addresses that can be on the internet. This is one of the limiting factors to the internet, is that that's how many addresses can be there. Every device that is connected to the internet must have a unique number. And that includes the end devices. So that includes your computer in your office, at your home, or whatever. It has to have a completely unique number to anything else connected to the internet. And the number of allocation was done very, very early in the internet. MIT, IBM, Microsoft all have more internet addresses than China. So it's basically the top line, which is the allocation of domain names. The United States has the most number of IP numbers allocated to it. There are ways around it, but that's basically it. So China and India have less than 0.5% of the address space. There are solutions. You can do a thing called network address translation, which means you can take, you can reuse some of the IP numbers. But the only trouble with this NAT, with the network address translation, is that you start to get into problems, because what happens, where up to 5 level of NAT actually happens in India, and generally it's 3 levels, and I think some places in China. So what happens is the ISP gives you a private address. They then, because what happens is your ISP connects to another ISP, connects to another ISP, connects to another ISP, connects to somebody which then goes out to the internet, which is why it takes a long time. Now, NAT makes a communication delay of 120 milliseconds, or can do. That's a very long time in networking terms. If you think about how long it takes 2 seconds in usability studies is considered way too long. So there's a problem with NAT. There is a solution, which is IPv6. I don't actually know if it's unidecimal, but there's a lot of addresses there. This will solve the IPv4 problem. And certainly in Asia, there are a lot of countries which are starting to specify that any device that's connected into them must understand IPv6, or Internet Protocol version 6. And the US Department of Defense is mandating, for various reasons, that it will go to IPv6. That's going to take a while to flow through the internet. In fact, in terms of change management, it's going to take quite a lot of work. But that will solve the address problem, hopefully in a long time. Okay, before I get to DNS, routing. The other problem with the internet, and these are problems which are becoming more obvious. It's not what's occurring now, but you've got to route through the internet. You've actually got to find where your destination is. And there's certainly an argument to say that in the future, as more and more devices, as people's mobile phones get connected, as their fridges get connected, and even as a lot of other countries come online, and I think this is more the point when more people come online, is you've got to actually find where you're going. So to even get out and to go through is going to take a long time. So that's going to become more and more difficult. Now, an IP address can give you a rough geographic location. There is ways and means of doing that, but that a geographic location doesn't mean anything. It's actually quicker for me in networking terms to get from here to the US than it is for me to get to a high school, or to the Royal Women's Hospital, because it's just the pipes is quicker. So even though IP addresses can be linked back into geographical addresses, that doesn't mean anything in network terms. Okay, DNS, which you were talking about. I was living in fear that you were going to actually tell everyone what was going on.
I don't know.
The domain name server or service is the visual or named representation of the internet. So unimelb.edu.au, MIT. You'll see that the www.unimelb is a different IP address to the email address because they're different services. It goes to different places. What has to happen is that when you're doing a DNS, you have to do a DNS lookup to go out to the internet. So what happens is you query, if your computer doesn't know what the IP address is, it's got to go off and find a DNS server and find out what that address is. The DNS server will translate the name into a number and then go out using that number. Ultimately, there's 13 root DNSs. One of them is the A root DNS, which is maintained by VeriSign in the US, and it contains the master address of the internet. what happens is, if I'm at the University of Melbourne, I query the Melbourne Uni DNS server. If it doesn't know the location, it goes off, I think it's the ARNet DNS server, and eventually that builds up into one of the 13 root DNSs. Whenever there's a change in the IP address, whenever University of Melbourne changes its IP address, Yahoo, Microsoft, any of them, whenever they change their IP address, they need to change or tell the root DNS. The reason I'm talking about those is because if somebody has corrupted one of those in the past and actually committed a whole heap of fraud, they attacked one of the DNS servers, they managed to change the DNS tables, and a whole heap of people went to one of the major auction sites and thought they were talking to one of the major auction sites, and they weren't. They were having all of their credit card details stolen. And there was also a couple of people that looked like they defaced a whole heap of websites, which they hadn't. So, and if you can't get to the DNS servers, you can't travel on the internet. When the code red virus hit, I was actually working in my office at the university, and the internet slowed, it stopped, because the code red virus attacked the DNS server, the Melbourne Uni DNS server, and I couldn't get out because it couldn't find any addresses. So, and this is another thing, as we get more and more people connected to the internet, more and more things connected to the internet, these root servers become much more needed to be relied on. The other thing about the internet is it relies on English quite a lot. There is some testing being done in international domain names, so using multiple character sets, multiple languages, and that's still in progress, but it's not progressing as fast as it would want. Okay, the organisations. The RSCs. The RSCs are where they come up to. The Worldwide Consortium is another one. ICANN allocates all of the IP numbers and all of the names. It delegates responsibility for those to the AU domain, and it was established by the Department of Commerce. The Department of Commerce, US Department of Commerce, still controls them. They have to sign off on all the decisions. VeriSign, who manage the .com and .org domain name registry, they have a lot of control. They actually are now suing ICANN for overstepping its regulatory power, which is turning into quite a nice little fight. And they have implemented various things which might bring the internet to a halt. There's a problem. I've just got to speed up because I'm running out of time. I do apologise. The people that provide the software, the browsers, Microsoft, Netscape, all those people, if they don't fix security vulnerabilities in their software, you're going to have a lot of trouble. Recently, there was a problem with one of the browsers where you actually got sent to a malicious site, even though it looked like you were going to do it. Until that was fixed, people were in a lot of problems. They didn't know what they were looking at. Something I might come and have a chat with the second presenters about was the UN is now trying to take control of the internet away from ICANN, which will be a nice little fight. After we go through these reasonable people, search engines are becoming a gatekeeper. More and more people are using search engines to find things. And that's only the surface web. There's another web beyond the surface web, beyond the search engines, which needs to be looked at. The other problem with the search engines is that they rank them. They rank your results, and if they don't put your result where you need it, then they can hide things. Also, the Church and Scientology had Google remove search results for anti-Scientology sites. And if you're looking for something, unless you know where it is, you've got to go to a search engine. The rise in broadband. That's causing a lot of problems in terms of copyrighted software and also security, because people are cracking into people's broadband connections, which have got powerful machines, lots of bandwidth. They've been running good attacks from that. Fraud is going through the roof. The Nigerian letter scam is great. Spam, I love them. Spam, they think is going at 62% of all emails. And this will get worse as more people connect to the internet. There'll be more idiots, and there'll be people that want to take advantage of them. I actually have just finished a Masters of Law, and the lawyers, although are good, they don't understand the internet, because the lawyers want to know location. You know, Mr. Green was killed in the conservatory with the knife. It's very, very important to lawyers where it happened. But having said that, they are learning. If you want to know, Dan Hunter's article is very, very good, and the first one was from the Johnston Post. We're starting to see nationalities try and take control and try and start doing things in different jurisdictions. So the French court. There's spam, consumer laws is varying. That's going to, like the EU are trying to implement their own consumer laws on anybody dealing with an EU citizen, which may or may not become. Again, protecting copyright is going to actually cause much more problems in terms of the internet, I think. As the people who control copyright turn up the screws to stop people from stealing or pirating the software, they're going to try and change the fundamental nature of the internet, and they're going to try and put protection devices inside of the internet, and therefore stopping a lot of new development happening. That could be very much. The other one is patent law is starting to become much more important in terms of the internet and in terms of devices connected to the internet. A patent, unlike copyright, is a monopoly right to control an idea. If you've got a patent for an idea, it doesn't matter how stupid it is. The patent officers apparently are allowing them now. And this is going to cause a lot of trouble, because if you've got a patent on something, you can stop other people from using it. And there's certainly... I can talk about that. Okay. I'll finish this up. Okay. As an example of why I don't think this is going to work, this amused me greatly. I got this in January. Okay, to stop spam, this is just a social control. To stop spam, the spammers generate fake addresses, and they send out spam using these fake addresses. To stop that, the webmail, like Yahoo and Hotmail, are starting to stop them from getting email addresses. So, because what used to happen is the spammers would just set up an automatic script to keep generating new addresses. So what they did is now, when you want to get a Yahoo address, they put up a picture of a number or a word, and you've got to type that in. And that's called a catch-up. Okay, so it's a distorted number, and basically a computer cannot read that number. And that's the way they're stopping people, or the spammers, from producing these millions and millions of addresses. So that's good. So what happens is the spammers are setting up automated scripts to go through the whole process, and then it waits when it gets to catch-up. And then they do a thing called deep linking. When you deep link, what you do is you actually take the picture, or whatever it is that you want, from one site, and you put it in another site that you want. The deep linking came to a famous case when a Scottish newspaper was actually deep linking and looked like they'd done a whole lot of research, but they deep linked into, I think, either the BBC or the New York Times. So what happens is you thought you were on this Scottish newspaper site, but you were viewing a New York Times article. Anyway, so that's deep linking. So what they do is they deep link this catch-up, this little picture. They offer free porn on another website. They deep link into that, and to view the porn, what you do is you've got to type in the number or the device or the word, and then that goes back and creates the email address for the spammer. And apparently they're doing it in real time. There's enough people surfing on the internet for porn that they can do this in real time. I thought that was fabulous. So, yeah, social engineering will always work. One of the other things is that as the internet grows, the gatekeepers are going to become more and more prevalent. They're going to stop more and more things. And I think it's something to be aware of. And I think also one of the things which might be missing is that people keep referring to the internet and how it was built and developed and all that, which is nice. But it's now become a big city. It's just about to become a really major country. So I think things are going to change. The internet has to get away from some of this stuff about how it was once a village, and this is coming out in a lot of the research and what people are finding, is that, and I think some of the old analogies are not working anymore, and we really have to move through. Now, from information systems, I don't have, and one of the reasons I presented here today was because I'm looking to find some new theories and some new ways of looking at this, and I'm more than happy to talk to people about it. But I think that from looking at how certainly e-commerce and use of the internet and use of all of these things are coming, it's certainly not what it once was in terms of its development. And the people are finding that in how new standards are developed. Organisations are becoming much, much more aggressive and forceful in the way they do things. There are people out there actively getting patents, and I shall finish on that. Thanks for listening. Fair enough.
A couple of comments. Firstly, the DOC doesn't sign off on major decisions for ICANN.
Oh, has it changed, hasn't it?
ICANN has to send a major report. ICANN has a constitution and a CEO and a board that makes the major decisions that they're implemented. The fact that they have problems implementing their decisions and that they regulate by contract is a separate issue. If you look on the ICANN website, you can read the latest report, which is only 2 days old, that ICANN has to submit to DOC to provide indicators of its commitment to its charter, which is introducing competition, which is being open and constructive, which is being transparent.
Okay, I stand corrected.
Secondly, the WSIS Internet Governance debate with the United Nations is not about the ITU taking over ICANN. It's actually, I think, a classic discussion about representation and the drive for developing countries and less developed countries to be involved in the governance of the internet is reflected in the WSIS Internet Governance debate, and it's led by Brazil and some countries in Africa who want to be heard.
Oh, yes.
I believe that if they were heard, their concerns in part would go away. And I think that one of those issues when we talk about representation and citizenry and control revolve around perceptions of control that the internet and its management is dominated by the United States. And I think that is an easy whipping boy argument. And I look at data about participation in the Government Advisory Committee. I look at the participation rates in the various constituencies within ICANN, and I look at the way the at-large system is constructed within the ICANN environment. And it's an interesting regulatory arbitrage, institutional innovation issue which is going on, and I think that it will generally die away. Frankly, because the ITU has no money, and they say that ICANN has access to lots of it. And it's an interesting one. Last comment about the lawyers don't understand the internet, I think that's nonsense. And I think that Australia is actually leading the way. If you read a recent judgment by Justice Sackville, he made a judgment about activity that had a direct impact on Australian consumers about being directed to a website for selling Opera House tickets. And the ACCC were responsible for that action. Satish Bojani was very, very involved in really significantly forcing the Federal Court of Australia to look at the way in which we participated and we are part of a global market for services, and it's a legitimate global market for services, not like the pornography industry. And I think that it's well worth going to have a look at that judgment. And Justice Sackville, quite rightly in the beginning, said, what's this thing doing on my list? Why is this here? This has nothing to do with me. Where's the jurisdiction? But nonetheless, took on that case and issued a judgment which protected Australian consumers. It didn't actually have anything to do with Mr. Chen on the other end, who lived in either Missouri or Alabama or Omaha or wherever the hell he wanted to be, but it did send a signal that we were listening quite carefully to things that looked like they were outside of our jurisdiction, but that we had some control over. And there's very, very, very many examples of that with respect to copyright, trademarks, domain name disputes. Sorry, long comment. I beg your pardon.
Terrible role to be the gatekeeper, but in the spirit of encouraging multiple voices.
Sorry, excuse me.
Has anyone got another question or comment they'd like to make?
The administrator is given the task of, if you like, ICANN has governance or sets the higher level governance and contracts out the administration role. So VeriSign has must administer and sort of do all of the legwork and the management for the .com and .au. So if somebody wants a .com or a .au name, ultimately that gets fed back up to VeriSign. They have evolved or devolved power to Australia for the .com.au, or ICANN's done that. But ultimately anybody that registers a .com name gets listed up with VeriSign, and they just check that it's all okay. They make sure that you haven't, there's no duplicate names, and they do a few other administrative tasks. But you need one single point which sort of says, yes, you can have that, no, you can't have that. And that VeriSign also provided the technology for the other registrars to do that are subcontracted to VeriSign, who's subcontracted to ICANN. Does that answer your question? Or?
Yeah, companies, private companies?
Yeah, they're private companies, yes.
I'm going to open the floor now for people to ask those burning questions they have of all of the speakers. We're eating into our lunch break now, so I'm banking on the fact that we're going to collectively self-regulate and ask quick questions and have quick answers. And in this conference, we're encouraging deliberative, participatory activity, not consultative activity. So I hope you'll take the discussion about it tonight. But just for a couple of minutes, if anyone's got a burning question I haven't had the chance to ask any of the speakers, now's the time. Right up the back, yep.
Just wondering what base program.
In open source, I'll talk on open source tomorrow. But the internet runs on. There's a whole lot of open source software the internet runs on, but it doesn't come into this debate so much. So I can talk to you about open source for a long time.
Yeah, just a question to Liz and Bruce. I'm doing research on open source software communities using similar data, Usenet data, and I was actually really impressed by how much you know about the participants, and you must know more than just what you can get from their email address. So I was wondering, how did you actually, I mean, I know you generally know their names. Could you know sector and occupational information as well?
I think it's safe to call it a community. It's a small community.
Yeah.
Because most of the posts come from basically a handful of people.
Yeah.
You can get a pretty good feel for where they're coming from. In a lot of cases they have quite clear, say, corporate affiliations. You know, they'll actually use a business name. One of the big issues with the list is because the list is, if you like, the level of entry into this list is very low. You know, my dog could sign on. There's no validation. It's not like, as Liz has pointed out, it's not like your traditional voting system where you've got to sort of, wave a passport or go to a state election, federal election. You've actually got to give some ID to get through the door. DNS list, it's not like that. Anyone can sign up. So we have someone who posted hundreds of posts, some of which were quite wacky, under a number of names, long rattles about sort of transgender and stuff that sort of really has nothing to do with domain name administration. It's completely irrelevant, and it's one reason why, say, people think, well, this list is nice, but it's interesting, but it's got nothing to do with my concern about, say, domain name administration. And so I'm not going to regard it as credible as a forum for distributing information, as a forum for, if you like, getting a feel for responses to the posts. So hence my comment, which I think is more extreme than Liz. I just don't think it's regarded seriously by a lot of decision makers and by a lot of stakeholders, by people in government, you say, who don't go to ICANN or outer meetings, but do have some interest in the way that the overall regime operates.
I think the other thing that we didn't touch on, and I'll just be very brief, we did not touch on, with respect in the context of representation, anonymity and pseudonymity. And we know that some of the posters, because it was quite a significant issue for the board, that some people deliberately chose to use anonymous and use pseudonyms